It's the 1980s. Millions of viewers are tuning into Top of the Pops each week. And indeed, pop was back, with all its fantasy, image and glamour. Anarchy has been crushed, and the major record labels are back in town, with video as their weapon of choice. Creating stars overnight, there's money to be made by the chosen few. This is a story of creativity, power and intrigue, set within the hallowed halls of 80s pop. Sade and Paul Anthony Cook, Just a Drummer. Part 3. When a band has worked together for years and they suddenly hit the big time, some members of that band get left behind. Sometimes for good reason, and sometimes it's a little more interesting. I'm Douglas Pye, and this is the story of Paul Anthony Cook, who got treated as just a drummer. In this series, I'm talking to Paul, who is the former drummer with the band Sade, and a friend whom I'd lost contact with for nearly 35 years. And here we catch up with Paul, who is now out of the band, and he finally works out what has happened, and court cases loom.
Finally, I was demoted to actually nothing after that last TV performance. So at least it clarified where I was. I was neither a session drummer or the original drummer. I was actually gone at that point.
So basically, that was you out of the band.
I got one last call from Stuart, who wanted me to attend a party with the band for some reason, and I thought, well, fine. I thought it was just like a goodbye party for me. Let's have a party for one last time with Paul. So Stuart picked me up in a cab. He could afford taxis then, which was great. I was very impressed, but he just kind of briefed me in the cab, which was a bit weird. He said, Paul, I think it'd be better if you just tell everybody that you've left the band of your own accord, and obviously it's going to look better for you if you don't say you've been sacked. Is that all right? And I said, well, yeah, no problem. I mean, if that's what you want me to put across. So we entered this club night, and obviously everyone's coming up to me and going, "Oh, Paul, you're leaving the band, leaving the band Sade. What's going on?" And I had to explain that, "Oh yeah, I've left the band." And Stuart was saying to me, "I think, are you playing with Bananarama?" Because funnily enough, there was a Paul Cook, a drummer called Paul Cook, playing on one of the Bananarama singles. So he was just hoping, I think, that I was, and that I'd migrated from Sade to Bananarama. At the end of the day, I suppose they were all thinking it would show everybody, me leaving in a different light, mingling with the same set of people we used to. And yeah, and I was effectively publicly managed out of the band as just a drummer that had left the band, simple as.
So after this, you no longer played for Sade, and I believe Sade, along with Stuart, signed another deal with Epic, and of course, Paul Denman was still in the band with some sort of agreement. What were your feelings towards the band at this time, and as you saw the singles coming out and the enormous album sales?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we were all surprised. I mean, we knew things were good, but we didn't. You never think things are going to be so successful. So, yeah, I mean, it was incredible the success Sade got in 1984. But to me, it was a bit of a release for me. I concentrated on my band Esposito, and I was trying to get a deal. I was writing music. I was producing demos, dealing with record companies. I had a manager at the time, and I thought, well, really, it's nothing to do with me. I've moved on.
And then come 1987, Lee Barrett gets the sack as Sade's manager. And you found out from his office that there were triple platinum discs awarded to you by the BPI in 1985 for your work on Diamond Life. And could they deliver them to you? Was that a surprise?
Yeah, it came out of the blue. I mean, it was very odd. I was living in flat in St John's Wood. I got the call. I knew nothing about the discs again until that moment. It was really bizarre.
And if you were a session drummer, would you receive this?
No, not at all. I must have been registered as a member of the band to get the discs, as when I played on Top of the Pops, I was registered as being signed to the record company CBS as well. I mean, I wrote to the BPI eventually, and they wrote back to me and confirmed that I would only get the discs as a fully fledged member of the Sade band.
Did this not raise any red flags for you about your position in the band?
No, it was just a part of what was a very weird episode with Sade and registrations. They couldn't quite make up the mind, what I actually was in the end. So, but it was impressive to put on the wall. Being a poor musician, trying to get a record deal, I thought they were platinum, so I thought I could sell them. But when I did take them out of the case, they were vinyl sprayed with, some metal paint. So I was very disappointed. I couldn't get any money from them.
And I'm now back in King's Cross for the next part of our story. And looking back over the last 40 years, this is one place where much of it really has changed beyond recognition. It was once really sort of run down relic of the Victorian era. It had a lot of character, but it was a bit of a shady character. But this area has now got, it's just undergone a vast development, and it's got swanky high-rise flats and offices, along with bars, restaurants and high-end shops. And the likes of Google, Facebook and YouTube have offices here, and of course it's here that Sony Music have their HQ. Now, talking of which, in 1993, Paul started court proceedings. So let's find out how this came about and why.
Yeah, so I was advised by a friend to send a letter to the singer with a claim to rights and to my rights on the Sade stuff, and I asked him for a payment for my work in '83.
And were you oblivious to the fact that you maybe owed money from your contributions to the album?
Yeah, I didn't know I had any rights, for my contribution at that time.
At that point, had you spoken to or been in contact with any of the band members since the 1980s?
Yeah, I was still friends with Paul Demon, and we were always in touch. We were good friends. We'd meet whenever we could within his schedule. I remember going to Paris. He'd organised me to go over. I think he'd gone back to the UK. They were in Paris recording the second album, Promise, and he said I could use his flat, and I took my girlfriend over. And he said he was going to leave me 500 quid in the flat. But we got there and we couldn't get in. He hadn't arranged the keys, so he'd screwed up in that respect. So uh, I ended up going up to Saint Denis, the recording studio in Saint Denis, in the North Paris, I think it was the North, to pick up some keys to try and get into this flat. Yeah, and I met all of the guys. I met Sade was in the control room. She was excited to see me. Did a little dance, and Stuart wasn't as excited to see me. He knocked over my beer bottle. I remember he wasn't very happy. But Andrew Hill was fine. I mean, he was throwing money at me left, right, and centre. You know, telling me to have a good time. Here's a load of cash. Have a good time while you're here, Paul. Yeah, it was great to see him and great to be in the studio with him at that time. And then I was invited by Sade to what was a really flash apartment in, I think it was the Isle Saint Louis. I think it was this little enclave in Paris. Yeah, we met, and I remember her massa clicked my neck, which was nice, and we had this interesting photograph with her on this chair and me and Andrew at the feet of the chair as though she was some kind of queen. So yeah, we had a lot of fun, and she mentioned the fact that she couldn't go out in public anymore, and she had to wear a wig and a disguise when she was driving around Paris. So yeah, no, and she was a well-established star then. Yeah, but it was great to see her. Good fun. Yeah, and then in '92 I got married, invited all the band. Paul came down dressed as a teddy boy, which was interesting again. Um, and with his mother, he brought his mother along, and we were at I think Ticton Hall for my wedding. Um, but none of the rest of the band acknowledged my wedding and never sent cards, and I thought it was a bit odd. Um, so yeah, I was slightly offended at that point. I thought they would have made more effort collectively. Um, and then it was that time when after I was married that a friend said, "Well, I just might have a claim against Sade for what I did." So he actually wrote the letter, which I then posted to Sade about getting compensated for my work on Diamond Live, and then it just all kicked off legally.
In what sense? What happened next?
Well, I didn't get anything back from Sade herself. Well, saying that, I think I got a very curt letter which said something like, "You should know me better, Paul. If you was a writer or a Jew writer in that respect, I would have compensated you. You know me better than that." I think I got a very brief note on it, but the main rebuke came from Brian Carr, Compton Carr Solicitors. It was a very kind of snotty letter from him, and he said I didn't have any claim whatsoever, and it was very derogatory, his terms in the letter, which annoyed me, which actually really pissed me off actually at the time. So then I met a solicitor, Riaz Burma, and he championed my cause in '95. He was a bit of a crusader, ex-barrister, but he was also into music. But I felt I'd been pushed into court proceedings by them all. Really, it wasn't a route I wanted to go down. And after that, I got an angry message from Paul Dem on my answer phone saying that we could no longer be friends if I was going to go down this legal route with Sade.
So court proceedings started in 1995 and ran through to 1997. Tell me what happened and what was the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I was supported by, as I said, Riaz Burma and his firm. They championed my cause, and if it wasn't for him, nothing would have proceeded. So, um, and he obtained legal aid for that case, which carried on right until the end. So I've got to thank him greatly for that opportunity, because not many people get that opportunity to take such a major artist and record company to court. Um, but at the end of the day, in the defence from Sade and Sony, but especially Sade, they were just saying that I was more or less sacked for incompetence and that I had no claim. And Sade herself intimated that in a witness statement, suggesting that my, drumming at the Vienna U4 show wasn't any good and that I was an embarrassment to her and the band at the time.
And has anyone verified that this was not the case, that all your drumming was up to par?
Yeah, I mean, at the time we hired two music industry experts. One of them was Elton John's drummer, Charlie Morgan, um, and he in his report he suggested that I was clearly an integral part of the band and a band drummer, as opposed to a session drummer from what he'd heard me play on all the tracks and the tapes we had. But I had no time to contest it. I couldn't go into court with the U4 video recording, which I had to prove that I was, cock on in that show. And my legal aid certificate got pulled, and I couldn't afford to actually go to court to to bring my case. I had a QC who was being paid 1,000 an hour, and it certainly wasn't possible for me to pay for that. So I missed the opportunity of being able to show that, on video I was spot on at that time at that gig in Vienna, and therefore prove that I was a good drummer. And after this, after my legal aid was pulled, I got offered 20k to stop talking about the claim. This was put into court at the time. I didn't accept it because it was on the terms that I couldn't write anything about the band in the future, which I didn't agree with. And at that point, my bill to the taxpayer was £15,000.
But if there wasn't a claim, why get offered £20,000?
I think it had been a cheap way to shut me up. I think they were hoping that I would accept that in full and final settlement, and they would get a disclaimer, so I could never go back to them in the future and sue them. I think that was the plan. I just think it was very badly arranged. But I never accepted it, and when my legal aid certificate was withdrawn, the money just went back to the band. You know, there was caveats attached to the offer, which I rescinded on the basis that I wanted to write about the band, and I wanted to talk openly about my experiences with the band in the future. Yeah, so I mean, it was a difficult offer not to accept. £20,000 at the time was a lot of money to me. I mean, I was unemployed with my family, an unemployed musician at the time still. So yeah, it was a very difficult offer to turn down.
And while we're here, let's do a quick summary of another case that was going on. Paul was also trying to collect his US performance royalties, which he contested through Phonographic Performance Limited, or PPL. It's a British music copyright collective. This investigation took place between 2000 and 2003 and triggered court actions between 2007 and 2009. However, the claim against PPL was dropped by Paul as he says he found it impossible to fight them or indeed direct them to collect his US royalties when he says there was a clear policy to only distribute that income to those signed to a major label. And this case against Sade was also struck out by a Hull judge in 2009 as Paul did not have a solicitor and couldn't argue his case in court. Hope you followed that. And then you started proceedings again in 2009 with the BBC, as you still hadn't received payment for your Top of the Pops performance in 1984. Tell me how this came about and what happened.
Yeah, so I sued the BBC over non-Top of the Pops performance monies and owed to me from '84. I mean, I looked into the contract with the BBC, and I should have got some residual payments. Subsequently, I won this case.
And to add in here, this was more of an admin error and not the BBC's fault, as they presumed that these payments had been made by the record company, and they agreed to an out-of-court settlement. The BBC are lovely people whom I like very, very much.
And in the case discovery stage, when I took them to court, the BBC sent me the singer's recording contract, which I was very surprised at receiving, but they sent me a copy anyway. And reading through it, I started to question the grant of rights clause in that contract in relation to the master tapes, and the fact that she had said, well, she had 100% ownership of those master tapes. And it was a subsequent 12-year conversation of me talking on social media about Sade and the Masters that revealed Jack Stevens through a chance meeting on, I think it was on LinkedIn, between somebody who said, "You need to speak to this guy." And I said, who is it? He said, "Well, it's Jack Stevens. He's the guy who signed Sade." And I remembered Jack. I remembered the A&R guy, but I didn't know his name was Jack Stevens. So he came forward and we started talking, and we had a lot of email threads and LinkedIn threads, and he was revealing a lot of information that I just wasn't a party to, due to my status in the band as just a drummer at the time. Um, and then, after he'd clarified situations around secret deals and, money's being transferred and the meetings with Robin Miller and all concerned, which were behind my back, and I was very surprised at, I then approached my current solicitors, and they advised me, yes, I did have a claim under the master rights situation and performance copyright situation, and that they would write to Sony and all concerned and try and move this forward. And it all brought into context the situation with the invoice, which I now presume was a fake invoice, and it was something that they were getting me to sign, from my point of view as a session drummer at the time, which I never was. I was unemployed. I never was a session drummer in London at all. And to get me to sign it to satisfy that master rights claim by what was the singer's company. Um, so basically, I mean, in a nutshell, if I hadn't sued the BBC in 2009, I would be none the wiser. I wouldn't have seen the singer's contract, and I wouldn't have really realised my current claim to the Sade master rights situation.
So where are you up to in the proceedings?
Yeah, well, currently I need to raise 25k for my solicitor to proceed to court. Otherwise, there will be no court date. I mean, I've spent a year, on being supported by friends and family, on dealing with Sade and Sony on a without prejudice basis. But to get this into court, I'm going to need at least a minimum of 25k. So I mean, luckily nowadays we've got crowdfunding, so everything's changed. We don't get legal aid anymore. If we need to be supported, we have to go online and get thousands of people to contribute £35 to the cause. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've got a page on Crowd Justice. We've raised around about 1,200 so far, and we've got a stretch target of 25. But that page is going to be there for a long time until we receive those pledges from people, and then we can take Sade to court. So I think I've set a little bit of a precedent here when you think about it, in that I'm most probably the first person in the world to try and take a major superstar to court via crowdfunding. So that would be an interesting one if we do get into court, because it won't be public money anymore. It'll be people on the internet supporting my legal case.
So after all this, do you still play the drums?
Good question, actually. I have tried, and I find the whole process rather industrial now. A singer in Chicago did hire me, actually as a session drummer, after all these years. Well, she paid me to work on her single, and we kind of worked remote. Obviously, she was in Chicago, but I remember getting to the studio, and it was like being a tradesman, getting my kit out, setting it up. I said to the guy in the studio, I was at Fairview, I used Fairview Music, which is a local studio, and I said, "This is, my God, it's so industrial, setting this kit up and getting started as a drummer." And I think, looking back, the whole commitment of drummers is extraordinary, and it just reminds me of the story of when we played in Philadelphia with the band, and this guy very recently contacted me on YouTube after he'd seen my stuff on YouTube, and he said I was a train driver and I missed the gig, but I got there and I was talking to the band at the bar, and you was breaking your kit down on stage still. And so that really sums it up. So the answer is, now, if someone wants to pay me, really pay me, then I'll play the drums. But I have to have a drum tech on hand, because after all, I'm now 60. So yeah, I mean, in some respects, I've become a session drummer.
And finally, what does your wife and kids think of the whole case? Are they like, oh no, not Sade again?
It's an interesting experience being in a band like Sade that is successful and also being connected to successful music, because it never leaves you. And people have still said to me, well, I still remember you from back in the day when you was on Top of the Pops, and that always lives with you. But my kids are very proud, and every time we hear Smooth Operator together, we all have a big laugh about it. And if anybody's abroad, in a bar or a hotel, they always send me a video on WhatsApp. For some reason, they find it quite amusing that they're sat there listening to me playing drums on Smooth Operator. So I'll get relatives and videos from people all over the world, you know, coming through to me, which is quite amusing. And I've just got a little story about when I was in Argos with my daughter Jasmine when she was younger, and we just sort of rocked up to the stand to pick up the toy, and Smooth Operator started playing. She goes, "Daddy, that's your song," and I said, "Yeah, darling, that's my song." So since then, she's always perceived that as my song, and then she actually went down to London to Ronnie Scott's to see where it all started with Pride and Sade, and was very impressed at Soho and that area and the club itself. And I think generally they've taken my creativity and strength with them in their careers into what they do. So overall, I think it's been a very positive influence on them, which in turn has helped them be successful.
And so, in conclusion, the story goes on for Paul as he continues to push his court action to show he was more than just a drummer. And hopefully, we'll be able to update you with a part 4. And as for me, I've finally heard Paul's story and the answer to the question I felt I couldn't ask half a lifetime ago in the Lord Stanley. And meeting up with a friend after 35 years has got me thinking about all the changes that have happened in my life, and indeed about all the changes that have happened in all our lives over the last few decades. How we all aim to be more than just a drummer. And with all the new and varied methods of communicating, I still think the best one is just talking. Fancy a pint in Lord Stanley?
If you're paying, Doug.
Yeah, I'll send you the invoice. Just a Drummer was written, edited, produced and presented by me, Douglas Pye. Music by Paul Cook, with Paul playing premier drums as used on Diamond Life, and sound mixed by Guilt Free Studios. This was a Cook Pye production.